For about 12 hours in July 2015, the DeAndre Jordan tweetstorm captivated the NBA and the sports world at large. The battling emojis and rapid-fire updates underscored a wild tug-of-war between two franchises vying to stay relevant in a changing Western Conference. But most importantly, it gave us beef. So how exactly did DeAndre's decommitment lead to Doc Rivers threatening to fight Mark Cuban in a cage match? Glenn Doc Rivers has never had a problem speaking his mind. A highly recruited prospect in high school, he grew into the role of emotional leader while playing at Marquette. Part of that role included chastising his teammates, even the entire student body, when it felt necessary. In the NBA, when words didn't measure up, here he is following the example of Terminator X and speaking with his hands against the Suns in '93. After retiring as a player and a brief sojourn into broadcasting, Rivers became head coach of the Orlando Magic, where he immediately won Coach of the Year and took the team to the playoffs in 3 straight seasons. He also dealt with, and may have even created, discord within his team, blew a 3-1 series lead, and had a dismal start to the 2003-2004 season, all of which led to his eventual demise in Orlando. But after moving on to Boston, miraculously the critics were silenced. Doc won the NBA title in 2008, due in no small part to these guys. You know what that champagne tastes like? Vindication. Then Doc and the Celtics dealt with infighting, a Celtics fan reignited an old beef with Doc, and the team blew a lead in the conference finals before Rivers left very messily for the Clippers. Vindication can be so fleeting. This has been Doc's story as a head coach. He's won a lot in the regular season, but in a sport that puts greater weight on postseason success, is he a great coach or even a good one? In contrast, Mark Cuban was just an ordinary, super rich fan of the Dallas Mavericks. He sat courtside, sure, but he was just as animated and into the game as anyone in the upper deck. Then he bought the team in 2000. The prototypical 21st century NBA owner, Cuban eschewed suits and luxury boxes for a t-shirt, jeans, and that same courtside seat. He maintained his fan persona too, screaming at opposing players, coaches, and referees. Especially referees. So much so even his players thought he was doing too much. On the surface, Cuban's shtick seemed to be working. The Mavs were finally a relevant team in the West, behind blooming superstar Dirk Nowitzki, a talented supporting cast, and their respected and knowledgeable coach. However, it's important to note all these guys were brought in before Cuban arrived on the scene. He just reaped the benefits. And those benefits soon turned sour as the Mavericks couldn't get to the promised land of a title. Cuban clashed with his coach to the point they didn't even speak to each other for years, and let that supporting cast walk away. Even when the Mavs finally broke through in 2011, they didn't come close to repeating. It could be argued that Dallas's success has come largely in spite of Mark Cuban. That's what connects these two guys. Outspoken personalities whose legacies are built on shaky foundations. The perfect combination of dry-aged seasoning for tasty beef. They just needed a spark. In 2015, the Mavericks and Clippers were coming off disappointing playoff exits. Coincidentally, both lost to the Rockets. Dwight Howard, who was a free agency target of Cuban's, then a target of his ire afterward, outpaced Dallas's bigs, and Dirk had minimal help. LA was one game away from the conference finals, but let a 3-1 lead slip away, a familiar refrain for Doc Rivers. There was also a reported feud between Chris Paul and DeAndre Jordan. Doubly bad timing for LA, as Jordan was an impending free agent and more than willing to test the waters. Man, is there anything more Chris Paul than rescinding someone's high-five privileges? To recap, the Mavs are in the market for an athletic rim protector, and DeAndre Jordan, the most athletic rim protector in the league, was looking to leave his team and very interested in going to Dallas. Cuban did not want to miss another chance at a running buddy for Dirk. He went to his go-to guy, Chandler Parsons, to recruit DJ. Parsons recounted on All the Smoke how he basically became Jordan's shadow for the summer so Dallas could reel in their big fish.
Like Mark kind of gave me and Dirk like reins, like, all right, like this is who we want, like go get him. So I'm coming out to LA. He was also with Dan Fagan, so we had the same agent. So we're partying together, we're working out together. I'm basically, his schedule is my schedule. I'm all over him, right? I'm like, I'm getting this guy.
The Mavericks also had a presentation involving Nowitzki and Cuban himself. This, combined with a lackluster pitch from the Clippers, motivated Jordan enough to agree to sign with Dallas. Think of the optics here for Doc. He's coming off possibly the most brutal playoff defeat in franchise history. DJ's about to dip out on him, and it's partially due to the fact Chris Paul decided he'd rather hang out on a banana boat with a couple other NBA players instead of his own teammate. Now, here's the part you probably remember. One day before the signing period for free agents began, Adrian Wojnarowski tweeted the Clippers had a delegation flying to Houston. Parsons tweeted a plane, which is interpreted as a response. Blake Griffin replied with his own very inefficient method of transportation. Chris Paul joined in, and so did Paul Pierce in the best way possible. It was all hilarious, but the stakes were high. The Clippers went to DeAndre's house, locked the door, and worked on convincing him to come back, or was it stay, with Los Angeles. As the day wore on, the emojis were replaced by whatever nuggets reporters could glean from the rumor mill, as well as some truly fantastic trolling from Griffin. Cuban and the Mavericks were literally on the outside looking in. Not actually looking in, since Mark couldn't get in touch with Jordan or even find his address, according to ESPN's Chris Broussard. All Mark could do was question Broussard's journalistic ethics in such a way that belied what he was really mad about. Finally, after the moratorium lifted at midnight, Paul Pierce put the cap on a truly unprecedented day with this image of DeAndre signing a brand new Clippers contract. The Mavericks were immediately salty. Parsons said DJ was disrespectful and, quote, not ready to be a franchise player. Cuban asserted DeAndre lied to him about his whereabouts that night, and he used his other social media platform to say Jordan should have at least called him. So Doc Rivers decided he'd had enough of Mark bad-mouthing his player and did the NBA head coach equivalent of writing a diss track. He went on a media tour. This is when things between Doc and Cuban really kicked off. First, Doc said Jordan didn't owe Mark any correspondence about his decision. Then, at a charity appearance in Boston, he detailed the unconventional start to DJ's re-recruitment and said Jordan always really wanted to stay with the Clips. It was clear that even though Doc Rivers knew Cuban didn't like him personally, he wasn't really sweating what Mark had to say. And just in case there was any doubt to Doc's contentment, he went on Colin Cowherd's show in September to tell the whole world just how he was feeling. Cuban had finally had enough, and he went on Cowherd's show the next week to get his lick back. Just look how angry Mark is as Colin plays Doc's comments for him. Mark asserted that Rivers absolutely had to retain Jordan to keep his job.
It shows you what someone will do when their entire future is vanishing in front of them. And that's exactly what Doc did, and I give him credit for it. His life, his professional life was over.
Bruh, these may have been the words of a hurt millionaire who didn't get what he wanted, but no way our man Doc could let those bars slide. He compared Cuban to Clippers owner Steve Ballmer, pretty much identical to Cuban, except with less hair and more collar on his shirts. He doubted Cuban's authenticity, his integrity, and to cap off this very mature beef, challenged him to a cage fight. I guess 3 p.m. at the flagpole wouldn't draw enough of a gate. This was an NBA coach challenging an NBA owner to a fight and inviting people to watch. Cuban, for his part, may have been extra salty, but remember, he'd listened to Doc gloat on TV for a solid 2 months before shooting back, and in one rebuttal, he managed to cut to the heart of Doc's anxiety. People were questioning his coaching and leadership acumen, just like they had in Orlando, and losing DeAndre would have put him on very thin ice as both coach and executive. For Cuban, this all had to sting for a few reasons. One, the Mavericks rolled out the red carpet for weeks to entice DJ to them, while the Clippers pretty much pulled an all-nighter to get him back. Two, Dirk had taken a pay cut the summer before, so the Mavericks would have more flexibility to sign free agents. Three, This was the closest Cuban had come to his white whale, and not only did he lose out, he had him, then lost him, and had to hear about it for months from the guy who beat him. So Mark Cuban wasn't ready to let anything go when the 2015-16 regular season opened. In November, when Dallas hosted Doc and the Clips for the first time, Cuban hinted he had salacious texts with DJ that he might someday release. The Mavericks got a blowout win that night, and DJ was booed every time he touched the ball. After the game, Mark asserted that while that beef had the side benefit of driving up NBA ratings, he was still more than ready to throw down with Doc. But they didn't throw down after that. The Western Conference was loaded, and both LA and Dallas had a lot more to worry about than a war of words. As Chris Paul put it, they were both too busy to beef. This feud faded pretty quickly, but the words of both cooks proved prophetic in the first round of the playoffs that spring. LA blew another series lead, this time to the Trailblazers. Dirk had minimal help offensively, and Dallas went out quietly. When Nowitzki eventually retired in 2019, Doc stopped the game so the LA crowd could give the Mavs franchise player a standing ovation. Cuban was moved by the gesture. Sort of. Since then, the questions about both have continued. Cuban never landed a quality co-star for Dirk before he retired, and is still trying to find the right sideman for his new European virtuoso, while also dealing with some truly despicable allegations from an old beef enemy. Rivers left Los Angeles after losing another series lead in the playoffs, moved on to Philadelphia, and promptly lost another series lead in the playoffs, while enduring continued criticism from former players about his coaching chops and character. He was fired following the 2023 season after, you guessed it, blowing another series lead in the playoffs. Mark Cuban and Doc Rivers are both NBA champions, but the validity of their success has constantly been scrutinized. When they chased after DeAndre Jordan, the insecurities about those questions manifested as a brief but incredibly petty beef. Years later, none of those questions have been answered. Hey, you made it to the end credits. See? That's me, Chris. Thanks for watching my very first episode of Beef History. If you want to hear me talk more basketball, check out the Skyhook podcast where me and my guy James talk WNBA in the Chicago Sky. Want more Doc Rivers beef? Check out this video right here. Until next time, see you by Lake Michigan.